Welcome to this lecture on social, human and sustainable development. This lecture relates to our MA program in Sociology, especially Sociology of Development. And today's talk will be specially focusing on approaches to development. When we talk about development, we usually talk about the trajectory of development of human societies. We have been knowing and we have been describing the society, the onward march of humanity from the stages of savagery, barbarism and civilization. A stage of attainment of human sophistication that started from the discovery of agriculture, controlling of fire and also discovery of the wheel. That is the foundation stone of civilization of humanity. Based on that, gradually society developed at the initial stage, what we call the primitive stage, the early form of development of human society. The primitive stage, in the primitive stage, human beings were widely engaged in hunting and gathering or small rudimentary cultivation. Gradually it progressed to a pre-modern society to modern society. In the process of progression, we have encountered the journey from agrarian to industrial, then we call a post-industrial society. In terms of economic foundation, we have shifted from the ancient society to feudal society, then gradually towards the capitalistic society. Now we talk about mostly a pre-capitalistic society. The whole transition is widely now we visualize. It has been encountered, it has been accelerated with the whole process of industrialization from the 17th and 18th century and its co-constituent what we call modernization. In the whole process, what we find that human being, even though we keep on describing ourselves to be rational, moral, and also a sophisticated animal on this earth, human being also self-seeking, simultaneously a creature that look to sustain its sustainability, its security. That is what we call the sustainability and livelihood security. The sustainability and livelihood security that started from the earlier stage, it has gone further and further. And gradually, within the whole gamut of modernization, of industrialization, we have seen that is a new process of development has taken place. Then how this development is to be counted, how this developmental anomalies to be taken care of, how the pre-modern society is to be brought into the modern society, how pre-industrial society is to be brought in the industrial society, or the pre-agrarian or the agrarian society to the industrial society. It was widely thought of and it was calculated by the economists and other experts, that is in terms of the growth of the gross domestic product or gross national product. So it has been considered in terms of precisely the economic growth, that human growth, human development has been synonymous to economic growth. So what we find, an amount of economic determinism has come in the way in determining human growth and progress in the society. So maybe in the productivity, expansion of the market and economy, and also industrial growth. So everything guided by in terms of human productivity. Productivity leads to the expansion of the market, market leads to industrial growth leads to the profit. Ultimately, it contributes to the whole gross national product. By doing so, we find there has been enormous process of free trade, that is laissez-faire economy. Earlier it was a self-sustaining, community-based, socially embedded economy that became a widely accessed, widely used liberal economy. It called the laissez-faire economy. Carl Polanyi, in his famous work, that is The Great Transformation, he talks about how the society from pre-industrial to industrial stage. In the pre-industrial state, it was a self-regulated society, regulated by social customs, norms, and societal need. As the society progressed, gradually industrialization came in. It from the self-regulated society, it got transformed into what he was calling a self-regulated market. So it was the market-embedded society, market-determined society. When it emerged, it gave the birth of the great transformation, that is a market-driven economy rather than a social-driven economy. So gradually we find the progression, that progression has taken the society towards a new direction. So what we find, Gradually, with the expansion of the market, we find there has been the market capitalism, the growth of capitalism across the globe. Then, with the growth of capitalism, that is the market. When you need more growth, you need more market, more raw capital, raw material, and once you invested the raw material, you want to produce more, and ultimately out of this production there is a growth of more and more profit and more expansion of the capitalism. But capitalism can't be circumscribed within a given phenomena, given society or a state. It needs wider space for its expansion. So gradually we find as the market capitalism widely developed in the Western society, and gradually the Western society, for the in search of new market, they took the help of colonialism. They started expanding its own ways, started colonizing the weak states one after another. So we can see from our experience, the countries and the states of the Asia become one of the colonized destination. And gradually we find that in the process of capitalism, market capitalism, colonialization, there has also been a process of decolonization that has taken place mostly after the Second World War. We'll come a little later, that part. But when we talk about this whole process of development, expansion of capitalism, expansion of industrialization, expansion of modernity, the world was divided into three important parts, three important philosophy of economic development. It needs market, it needs growth, it needs GDP. How the GDP would be, it is through industrialization, through privatization, and also it is in terms of expansion of more and more market across the world. So we found the growth of the capitalist world, widely spearheaded by America and its allies, mostly in the West European countries. So what we find, the private ownership of the property, the industrialization, modernization become the slogan. That is one part of the world. It developed, it continued until continues. It started the capitalist world. We can start from 2021 or so, and gradually it started spreading. Then we find the expansion of the socialist world, another philosophy. It started with the adoption of the Marxism, Leninism in various parts of the globe. So it was 1917, that is the Russian models of development took place. Then we find that China become part of it, and so many other underdeveloped countries, especially of the global south, become the part of this communist ideology. And what they propagated for in the economic development. In contrast to the private ownership, they talked about the community ownership, a different. They talked about the market regulated planning, the capitalist world. The socialist world started talking about the centralized planning. The planning would be done by the state. Then capitalist world was talking about the private ownership. Here we talk about the abolition of the private ownership. Rather, it will be the state and community ownership. Then earlier it was talking about the industrialization of growth. Without mass of a concern of distributive justice, in the socialistic model, it became a distributive justice was related to the growth. Then we find another third world economic formation. In the third world economy, we find another kind of development. It was talking about a mixed economy, that is intersecting both the capitalist world and the socialist world. So both it is a mix of the private ownership and the government ownership, and it was both of the abolition of the property, then also simultaneously holding of private ownership. So and also distributive justice and also state control. Simultaneously, you find a mix of both. It gave birth to a mixed economy in the world. And but in all this economy, what they looked at till 1960s and 70s, widely talked of in terms of if any country is to be developed, it should be developed following the path of industrialization, urbanization, modernization, and that will contribute to the economic growth, that is the GDP. So ultimately that is the model of development widely accepted. So development equivalent to growth, it was widely accepted. So what we find that when we are talking about the growth, how the growth will take place in a society, no growth take place without the use of energy. I mean, once we are using the energy means varieties of the energy. We are having the natural energy, the wind, the sun. We are having the fossil fuel, that is we call it another variety of the energy that is widely used for the production of electricity and others. So if you need industrialization, if you need growth, you need industrialization. If you need industrialization, you need energy. What has been the pattern of energy use across the world? So what is important at this stage, Before we go to the later part of this discussion, that is the social human development and sustainable development, what has been the impact, what is the pattern of growth and the growth and the energy consumption across the world. So let us have a glimpse of it. What we find, that is production, control and consumption of energy has been one of the largest phenomena across the world, because this phenomenon, the production, control and consumption of energy, that is energy of both of biomass, mineral, fossil fuel or the new and renewable sources of energy, it is linked to development, no doubt, but it also linked to the pollution and climate change. So we are taking two parts of the development, economic development on the one hand, the pollution and the climate change on the other. Let us come to the another important part. When we are talking about use of the fossil fuel, the mineral, the biomass, etc. like this, what we find, it generates a lot of CO2 on this earth. It creates the greenhouse gases on this earth. It is widely talked about the use of biomass, mineral and the fossil fuel widely contributed to the greenhouse gases. Rather, 60% of the greenhouse gases are widely produced with the use of biomass, mineral and the fossil fuel. Now, this is the global phenomenon. But what we find, there has been a consumption inequality on the energy. What we find, that the global north has consumed the most and the global south consumed the least. So what we find, energy consumption has been linked to the affluence, linked to the economic development of the global north. But if we find the poverty and the marginality, it has been linked to low energy consumption, that is linked to global south. So what we talk about, if we were to talk about the development in terms of environmental sustainability, we are to link to low consumption of the energy, low consumption of the resources, what we call this energy resources, the biomass, the mineral and the fossil fuel. So that is the environmental sustainability. So what we find, it has so happened, low consumption, though it has given the environmental sustainability, low consumption has been linked to deprivation, marginality and low level of economic development of the global south. So what we find, the energy use pattern among the poor countries and the global nation, it has not been the same. It has been unequal. The pattern of development has been unequal. Pattern of growth has been unequal, and that is reflected widely in terms of the one's responsibility to the sustainable development. If we have a global picture, try to have a global picture in front of us, that is how it is used and how it is linked. As I told earlier, growth is linked to industrialization, and industrialization is linked to energy consumption, and energy consumption linked to your contribution to the CO2, that is carbon emission. And that is also you are having per capita per consumption and the national per consumption and also your world share. And then we find the people, those who are living below the poverty line, the people living below the poverty line. If we look into that, let us compare some of the countries of the world. The US, it is, we know, one of the most industrialized nation of the world. It is per capita energy consumption is to the extent of 7,050.6, that is the per capita energy consumption. That is we are talking about the US. Let us talk about the China. That is, China's per capita of energy consumption is 1,669. So what's a glaring difference between US and China? You look into, again, let us bring Japan in between. Japan per capita energy consumption is to the extent of 3,700 megawatt. That is like this. So gulf of difference. If we come to Indian context, we will find per capita energy consumption is less than 1,000. Less than 1,000 kilowatts. But once you are using more and more energy, now what is if you are using more energy, obviously you have produced more, you have got per capita income. US using more energy, its per capita income to the extent of $14,000 plus per annum, $43,000 per annum, that is US. The more consumption of energy, more contribution to the GDP. And what we find, that is people living below poverty line in USA only to the extent of 0.2%. That is the US scenario. And what is the contribution of US to the CO2? That is the per person. If we look into, it is 15 ton per person. That is US, that is contributing, its global share is to the extent of 16%. So that is the US. If we compare the US with Japan, this is another. Japan, it's more or less the similar. We find that Japan is consuming less energy, that is 3,700 kilowatt energy. We find the per capita, and it's also per capita GDP is 3,986. Rather, let me put that way, 39,286 is the per capita GDP of Japan population. And it is CO2 is only to the extent of 4%, because it is per capita energy consumption is quite less, is 9.9%. That is, and people living below the poverty line only 0.2%. So what a glaring difference. Let us come to China, another country. As I told earlier, it is per capita energy consumption is only 16,000. And what is a GDP per person? In China, it is 9,000. It is world share to the CO2 is 29%. And per capita CO2 is only 4.4%. People living below the poverty line, that is people earning less than $2, is only 0.7%. So what we find, less consumption of energy is linked to less per capita income, simultaneously less contribution to the CO2 for all those countries. Let us come to an Indian context. In Indian context, as I told, it is less than 1,000 kilowatt per person. And what is our GDP? Only $2,300 per person GDP in our case. And what is our contribution, per capita contribution to the CO2? It is only 1.2%. So our contribution, Indian contribution to the CO2 has been least, because we are not an industrialized nation. We have remained predominantly agricultural country, now leading towards an industry, gradually a knowledge-driven society. But we have a high amount of people because of low rate of economic growth, low rate of per capita income. Our number of the people, rather percentage of the people living below the poverty line is 28% of the total population living below the poverty line. That is the rural population. At all India level, 22% population living below the poverty line. So what a glaring difference between US and India. In US, only 1.2% people living below the poverty line. In our case, 22% of the people living below the poverty line, because in our case, economic growth has not been accelerated with the extensive use of energy. But otherwise reporting, more contributing to the economic growth, America has more contributed to the CO2. In India's case, we have found that India, not using much of an energy, it has not contributed to the accelerated growth of CO2 on this earth. Now, what has happened up to it? Now, what we find, that is, in the all over the world, there has been a deformities of development. Notwithstanding the whole question of sustainability of this earth, the climate change and other. What has taken place in this earth, quite important, is that across the globe, the developmental paradigm, the developmental goal has not been achieved the way it was to be achieved. It was thought of even immediately after the Second World War, when the IGNOU was founded in 1942. It was talking about a justifiable world. It is a kind of a balanced world. But what we find, that with enormous economic growth in one parts of the world, a high amount of productivity, but it is sustained by huge hunger in another part of the world. So Ethiopia, a country epitomized by hunger. In India's case also, 17% of the population, it is widely talked about, 17% of Indian population go to the bed in the night without having sufficient food in their stomach. So when the productivity has been linked to the sustained hunger, then economic growth has, in many parts of the world, it has been also with the social vulnerability for the slum dwellers, for the aged, for the women, for the poor, for the peasants. So we find the economic growth has not been equal, has not addressed the issue of social vulnerability. Then we find there has been prosperity. Like productivity, there has been prosperity, we have found prosperity of one section of the people, then downward mobility of a huge section of the people. Think of the migrant laborer of India, those who are the small agricultural laborer or the tenant or the sharecroppers. Gradually they become the landless laborer. They are unable to get job in the rural areas. Gradually they are migrating to the urban areas. So what we have find, there has been a prosperity of a section of the population across the world. There has been a poverty-ridden population one part of the world. They're carrying the rural poverty in the urban areas and experiencing a sharp downward mobility in the society. Then we find enormous pace of digital development in some of the country. Digital development is 100%, but also we find there has been digital divide. A country or some section of the population are not getting sufficient access to the digital devices on this earth. Let's come to another. We find there have been quality educational institution, that is in some parts of the world, in some parts of India. That is, we're having in our country, you may be knowing, we're having 912 universities in the world, more than 44,000 colleges across the country. Simultaneously, we find the huge amount of people living below the with sustained illiteracy. So what we find that educational development, institutional educational development has not taken care of the burden of illiteracy. That is another phenomenon. That is a global phenomenon. Then we find the economic growth. In many places, economic growth has skyrocketing. It has been roughly around, before this slumping down of the economic growth, it has been around 10% in many countries. India has shown at the 9.4% economic growth rate in 202, and growth rate has also been accompanied by unemployment. You see that is also case of America, that is the case of Canada, many parts of the world. So we find there has been occupational mobility with the along with the presence of child labor in the country. That means growth of industrialization in many parts of the world. There has been an enormous growth of slum. If we take India, you may be knowing, now in our country, more than 32% of the people live in the urban areas. But simultaneously, you have to accept that in our country, more than 19% of the people live in the slum. Who are the slum dwellers? The slum dwellers are the agricultural laborer, sharecroppers, tenants, displaced artisans. They are unable to get employment in the rural areas, gradually migrate to the urban areas and get concentrated in the unorganized sector of employment that accommodates more than 94% of our workforce. So we find that along with industrialization, there has been displacement. Economic growth has been accompanied by gender discrimination. Varieties of gender discrimination taking place, that is not even equal work and equal pay. Not in terms of gender sensitivity, which is to be reflected in the workplace. We find many places, even the minimum statutory requirement giving certain facilities to the women workers, those are not given, both in economic terms, social terms, and the social security terms. So along with that, we find all over the world, the economic growth has brought in the whole notion of new citizenry and also democratic practices. But along with the democracy, proliferation of the democratic practices, there has also been the criminalization of the politics. Enormous interpenetration of the criminal characters coming to be the member of our legislatures and the parliament. So what we find across the globe, there has been practice of democracy along with the criminalization of politics. So what we find, there has been developmental imbalances that has also produced violence and extremism in the society. So what I am talking about, that is, we have seen economic development has been seen conventionally. It is accelerated with the industrialization, accelerated with modernity. So industrialization and modernity is considered, it is the cornerstone to achieve economic growth, that is GDP. But even you are getting more and more GDP, you are contributing more to the environmental sustainability, contribute to environmental non-sustainability, and contributing to varieties of deformities, that is environmental deformities in the society. So these are the certain finest phenomenon taking place, or the negative phenomenon has taken place along with economic development and developmental anomalies which we talk about in our society. Now, when this developmental perspective widely thought of, that is, we talked about this economic growth, the way it has been a re-articulated thought of, that is market-driven economic development widely thought of till 1930s, because in 1930s is widely came of in terms of a welfare state perspective. What is the welfare state? The welfare state will take care of the basic minimum need of the people, widen the space of human choice, and it will ensure employment, education, health, and other social security. The welfare perspective, it articulated the citizenship right, articulated certain welfare perspective within which human beings are to do that. But within the welfare space also, it provided the space, it created the space, a development of a capitalistic unequal framework of development. Within we find so many developmental anomalies has taken place. And developmental anomalies has taken place not only India, it is across the globe, global north and global south. If we talk in terms of it is the most affluent section of the world, that is the global north, and also affluent section of the global south, they have been the beneficiaries of the conventional modes of development. So it was equated growth, economic growth equivalent to development, economic growth equivalent to industrialization, economic growth equivalent to modernization and urbanization, it was thought of. But these environmental anomalies brought a lot of thought in terms of rethinking the developmental perspective. If we are to rethink the developmental perspective, we will have to recast our developmental discourses, how these are to be recasted. So it was widely talked of in terms of let us talk economic growth along with social and human development. Let us talk. It was the academia, it was the policy planners, it was the third world politicians, the academicians, the economists specifically. They started widely talking of rethinking the developmental discourse in terms of social and human development. Women and development, women in development, gender and development, varieties of the developmental perspectives are coined, and it was within that it was thought of, if development is to be thought of not only in terms of economic growth, development should be a freedom. Development should be considered as choice. Development should be equated with the happiness. So ultimately, if ensured development, social development and human development, human development and social development with gender justice, and development and freedom and happiness, then perhaps we will be contributing more and more to the cornerstone of sustainable development. Now, when we talked about the development, we talked about development equivalent to economic growth as we talked about. Now, it is widely now thought of starting from 1980s, mid-1980s onward, that is social development is an inalienable, is an inseparable part of economic development. It is widely forecasted and widely emphasized by varieties of the social scientists, the Indian social scientists like Amartya Sen, Mohabul Haq, also World Development Organization, widely talked about that development itself is not sufficient. It is to be integrated with social development. What is social development? Social development will take care of the development of each and every segment of the population. It is not development of only one segment of the population. It will take development of the holistic development, that is the inclusive development, integrated development, that will take care of the development of everybody, not just one, not another. It will be an inclusive development for everybody putting together. So putting everything together, what they tried to bring in is started talking about, when we are talking about development, it started talking about human well-being and also human development. When you talk about the human well-being and human development widely talks about well-being, some of the crucial indicators of human existence of the society that will eliminate poverty, that will talk about livelihood security, that will talk about the educational well-being, that will talk about employment security. So what we are talking about, that is the human development, that human development will be integrated with the social development with integrated with economic growth. So what it is widely talked about, growth is not an end in itself. Growth is not for the growth. Growth is not for only industrial development, for more profit and more industrial development. Growth is a means to augment and accelerate human development, and human development will augment the process of social development. The interlinkages between the economic development, human well-being, and social development is a thought of, this is widely talked about. Now, this thinking is not new only in terms of 1990s or 1991. It's started coming in 1990 and 1991 when the UNDP started publishing its Human Development Report and World Development Report. But the basic tenets of this human development, basic tenets of social development, social well-being was incorporated in UN Charter 1948. Also, Right to Development 1986, it is widely talked about, and gradually it was articulated, that is, what is development? It is, as Amartya Sen talked about in 1999, that is, a development should be viewed as a process of expanding real freedom that people enjoy. So what are the freedom? People want to have freedom from illiteracy. People want to have freedom from domination, freedom from ill health, freedom from lack of rights, lack of citizenship right in the society. So what is talking about, the development must be equated with giving a wider choice that will make the people the choice, within the choice, by exercising choice, they will enjoy the freedom in the society. So gradually what Amartya Sen, Mahbubul Haq and the World Development Report, Human Development Report talked about, that is, it requires removal of the major unfreedom. What are those unfreedom? That is, that deprives people from satisfying hunger, depriving people from minimum nutritional requirement, depriving people from the healthcare facilities, the clothing facilities, the shelter facilities, the clean air, water facilities, the sanitary facilities, etc. facilities. So it is talking about development will take care of all those hindrances that brings unfreedom for the people in the society. So what it is talking about, there will be enormous opportunities. The developmental process should bring opportunities, the economic opportunities, political opportunities, social opportunities of the people, and so that they can be equal partnership of development along with other section of the people in the society. So that is we talked about. That is we talked about in terms of development. That is development and social and human development. Then another perspective widely talked about in terms of gender and development. No development is sufficient unless we talk about the gender component in it. The all developmental perspective, what we find that there are certain indicators of gender development in the society in terms of access of property, access to education, access to employment, access to decision-making processes. But what we find in the whole developmental process till 1990s, the way it was thought of, it was talked of, it has brought in, that is, it has intensified rather gender inequality in the society. And within that, women has got a mixed gain. That is, sometimes they have been benefited, sometimes they have been least benefited. And sometimes they have been widely oppressed by the double burden in the society. What are the double burden? Double burden means the extramural household activities women have to do as a breadwinner. Simultaneously, they have to take care of the household chores. So whatever integration, rather overlapping of this burden, the extramural burden and intramural burden, home breadwinner burdens and also housekeeper burden. So what we find, that burden imposed on women. And also within this process, gender role stereotyping, gender role expectation, which is expected of a woman to do, that has also been reinforced, because no developmental perspective has come being gender neutral in the society. In the way, it has reinforced gender stereotyping in the society. And also simultaneously, in the traditional economy, like traditional subsistence agriculture, in the hunting, gathering, in the fishing, the woman had a traditional role, traditional equal role along with the other male folk. As the society developed, that it came from the traditional to this non-traditional economy. Women started eroding its traditional influence, traditional role in the economy. So what happened ultimately? When majority of the people started migrating from the rural to the urban areas, there is another area. Gradually, we started finding a kind of a feminization of the household. Many of the places, because of employment insecurity, agricultural underdevelopment, lack of rain and water, people migrating from the hill, people migrating from the backward areas, coming to the urban areas, and women are left alone at home. So ultimately, it is contributing to the feminification of poverty. Then we find another process that started coming in, the differential access to education. The women are more engaged in the household chores. They are more engaged in the housekeeping, more engaged in maintaining the household. They are not getting enormous scope to go to the education. So you will find invariably women's access to education has been minimal in the society because of practical reason on the one hand, or stereotypical gender choice on the other. There has also been simultaneously feminification of poverty. If total data you see, 28% of the people living below the poverty line, if you put the male-female ratio, number of the female living below the poverty line will be higher than the male folk itself. These are ultimately also contributed the development, the environmental degradation. When environmental degradation has taken place in terms of drying of the water resources, women walking more to fetch the water, drying of the, then deforestation, people walking kilometers after kilometer to collect the firewood and the fodder for the animal. So what is happening out of this environmental degradation? Both the soil, water, the earth, air, women are increasing more and more hardship in the society. Now what is happening? There have been introduction of the new technologies in many places. This has also increased women's drudgery in the work. So what we find ultimately, that is all the developmental direction, trajectories, it has widely contributed to the drudgery of women in the society. That's why the Human Development Report 1991, where they talked about that development is to be gendered, means it is to be gender sensitive. It talked about if the development is not engendered, means if the development is not made gender sensitive, it is going to be endangered. When the whole developmental discourse itself, it is going to be endangered. In that way, development, as I told, it is thought of in terms of giving equal opportunity, equal choice to a section of the people, but it is going to be used, or going to be a tool only in the section of certain, a tool in certain section of the population. So it will increase developmental disparities in the society. That's why it is talked about. If development is not engendered, it is endangered. So there is every need development is to be thought of in terms of a new developmental discourse that is in the society. What is this new developmental discourse we are talking about? So far we have talked about development with growth. We have talked about development with a human, social development. Then we talked about development and gender development. Then let us come to another stage, that is a sustainable development. How the sustainable development is articulated. As I told earlier, that is economic growth model of development widely characterized by the use of the modern technology. That is what we talked about. Use the land, labor, capital, and organization into put together in an effective way. You will get the economic growth both in the industry and in agriculture, and it will pave the way of more and more urbanization and industrialization. That was the model of development. But it is now widely thought of that model of development, totally engineered by use of modern technology and industrialization, has used the energy and the natural resources to the optimum level, and that has brought a big challenge to the survival of human being on this earth. It is widely talked about that model of development, that is industrialization, growth incentive development, technology incentive development. It has been mostly widely talked about the Western economic development, Western model of economic and technological transformation in the society. And what it does, it metabolizes the huge quantities of natural resources, and it leaves a trail of toxins on the earth. So what we find, it has not been an environment friendly. It has not been human being and nature friendly. So by bringing that, when we are not friendly, why not friendly? Because this is contributing more to the CO2 and bringing a lot of toxin on this earth. Now, widely talked about some of the those who are the protagonists, what we call it, of this sustainable development discourse, that is Woodgate is one of those one, and Woodgate widely it talks about the way the developmental discourse has brought the whole question to the environmental sustainability, the way it has brought a big threat to the environmental sustainability by bringing a degradation on this earth, water and the natural resources. By bringing in, it has brought a crisis in modernity. We thought of modernity will be a force that will liberate the people, in terms of thought and action, bring a harmonious relationship between human being and the nature, and that has not been. So what he's talking about, is bringing a huge crisis to modernity. So it is also widely talked about the Western model of development, rather the triumph of the Western model of development. It has victimized widely the localized, native, the nature-centric, indigenous model of development. Those are widely considered to be sustainable and sustaining development on this earth. Now, to break that, what we find, that is those concerns of Western model of development, the concern for degradation of the earth is widely talked about several UN conventions, and it was talked about that how it can address the need and development of human being in the society. So starting from 1972, the Stockholm Conference, that is one of the famous conference, for the first time it talked about the climate concern. And those concerns, it talked about the modern industrial societies now dare to realize that we live in one world. Because the modern industrial societies, they are thinking, we are modern, we are developed, we are industrialized, rest are under development, those are pre-modern, and maybe at times rustic and uncivilized. So what that was talking about the Stockholm Conference 1972, that is Western model of development, is to realize the earth is one. It is not differentiated world. So you will have to recognize the whole issue of environmental degradation, and environmental degradation is not a phenomenon only of the Western world, though it is contributed by the Western world, but it is widely contributed by the Western world. We have to think in terms of more and more in terms of environmental sustainability. Then in 1974, widely talked about the Club of Rome, that is the limits to growth. What is the limits to growth? Because we are talking about the economic growth equivalent to growth of civilization, growth of development and development. It is widely recognized and documented that realization of the impossibility of infinite growth with finite resources is a myth, because your resources are not infinite. Your resources are finite, they're limited. So what you want to achieve it, if your resources are limited, you will have to recast your model of development, and it should reach out in terms of sustainability of the earth. Then it comes the Global 2000. It is widely talked about, that is it is rather widely talked about the President Charter. It is talked about, that is also it talked about the realization of the lifestyle, and that lifestyle can't be so reproduced that it will endanger the whole earth, the human being, the nature, everything on this forum. Then we find the conservation strategy, it was in 1981. It is widely talked about. So what we find that gradually they also talked about the global strategy, the global warming is gradually coming, that is to be recognized, a new phenomena to come in. Gradually we also find there was the Global Consortium on Environment, 1987. Then in 1991 it is talked about the caring for the earth. A new phenomenon came from the world community. Then we found this Art Summit. It is the UN International Nations Conference on Environment and Development. It is the famous Art Summit. There was a 21 agenda. It is the Art agenda. What it talked about, the code of human conduct of the 21st century. What should be the code of conduct of the human being? We are having everything, but there is no code of conduct. We keep on philosophizing. On the one hand, human beings are to be rational, calculative, moral animal. Simultaneously, we also find a human being are the self-seeking, the nasty, the solitary creature on the other. So this is to be balanced. If it's a balance to be an ideal world, perhaps the code of human conduct is to be articulated, is to be documented, and that should be part of not only the human rights, that also rights of the earth, the rights of human being on the earth, rights of citizenship. As you know, in our constitution, Article 42, Section 7, widely talked about our rights of the citizen, and one of the rights of the citizen is that protection of the universe, protection of the environment. So that is one of the part, the futuristic. So what we are talking about in our constitution in 1975 or 76, that is a new one. That is not a new one, because protection of the earth, it is a part of the Indian culture, part of the Indian knowledge. That is the kind of ecosystem within which Indian society live in. We'll come a little bit later to that. So what we find, that is, by saying so, now there is a need. What is sustainable development? We will have to define what is sustainable development. Usually sustainable development, we can define very simply. Sustainable development is that development that meets the need of the present generation without compromising the need of the future generation. So what is that? We'll have to sustain ourselves in terms of the availability of the resources with us. But we have to keep in mind, we are not the first and last person on this earth. We are having another generation is going to come, going to replace us. So we have to leave something for them. We have to leave their due for them. So here, to live in a society, a developmental model that will meet its present requirement without compromising the need of the future generation. What is the need? First, we will be talking about the need of the energy, need of the clean air, need of the water, need of the good health. So what are the requirements that is to be taken into consideration? But without simultaneously, we have to keep in mind that is to be met, but without compromising with the need of the future generation. So sustainable development goal, widely talked about in terms of 17 pillars. That is, if world is to be sustained, that sustainable development, first, there should be eradication of the poverty. There should not be poverty. There should be zero hunger. Nobody on this earth should live without having sufficient food on their stomach. It was pathetic that one woman was selling her child to get 22,000 rupees in Andhra Pradesh. That news came day before yesterday. It is because of hunger, because of poverty, people are coming. Maybe it is widely augmented by the present stage of corona-driven migration of the remigration, return of the migrant laborer. That is one. But simultaneously, poverty is another, hunger is another. Sustainable development ensures that poverty and hunger is to be eliminated from this earth. There should be good health and well-being to be ensured. There should be quality education for all. If we are unable to give quality education for each and everybody, then we are creating the platform of unequal growth of the citizen on this earth, but not giving everybody equal education or quality education. We are making the imbalance in the society. What sustainable development talks about? Quality education for everybody, so everybody can be the stakeholder of development in equal terms. It should be gender equality, the fifth one. Everybody should be, or male, female should be treated equality in the society. There should be provision for the clean water, clean water, and provision for sanitization in the society. Now we are talking about the sanitization because of the corona infected world, but it should be part of your everyday life. You should get clean water, you should have all the provision of sanitation. There should be clean energy. And now we find that is Ujala Bharat program. It is making the gas cylinder available across the country. That is making available clean energy across the country. But we find the plight of the rural women. They are walking for kilometers after kilometers to collect the firewood, to lead the hearth in their house to cook the food. So unclean process of cooking the food, cleaning the energy. Sustainable development talked about there should be a clean energy that is totally dependent on solar, wind, biomass, biogas, those kind of energy. The decent work and the economic growth. We need economic growth, but economic growth should be based on a decent work. The decent work means the work that does not create pollution, work that contribute to the environmental sustainability, the work that does not discriminate and devalue somebody's existence in the society. So there should be sustainable cities. There should be sustainable cities. There will be industry along with the innovation, and it also talks about the reasonable consumption, unit consumption. If there is no consumption, there will be no demand. If there is no demand, there will be no supply. If there is no supply, there will be no need of industry. But everything is to be based on an innovative industry to be accompanied by reasonable sense of consumption by the consumerist. There should be climate action. There should be concern for the life below the water. That is, the life, sea life below the water, we feel less concerned water. There should be life on the land. It is not only we consider human being rest of the nature. We should not forget human beings are also part of the nature. We are also part of the nature. The day human being has forgotten they are not part of the nature, perhaps the destruction of the earth has started from that day itself. So we have to talk about life below the water, life on the land, and a peace and justice for the whole world. Also, we have to talk in terms of the partnership on this earth. Simultaneously, we will find now there is sustainable development agenda for 2030. So what we are talking about, a development agenda is to be thought of. It is widely taken by the UNO. It is widely accepted by the member countries of the world. India is one of the member countries accepted that. What it talks about, the 5P. What are the 5P? Major concern of the sustainable development is that you are to put the people at the center of all development. When you are bringing the people at the center of the development, you are not going for economic growth for the sake of the growth, for economic growth itself, because your economic growth becoming a means to an end to the people's development. People's development means people's human development and people's social development. That is the P. Your to center concern is the people. Second concern is that your developmental perspective should take care of the planet. The planet should sustain. Now we are finding so many natural disasters taking place, and many of the environmentalists and philosophers talking about perhaps it is anthropogenic. Climate change is anthropogenic because it is contributed by human beings on this earth. So they have to take care of the earth. Then the prosperity. The prosperity should not be only for one section of the population. Prosperity should be thought of in terms of all stakeholders of the society. The economic prosperity, the cultural prosperity, the prosperity in terms of identity and recognition in the society. It should ensure peace in the society, because unless there is equality, unless there is a sense of recognition of each other's existence on this society, the peace may be destroyed. So peace should be ensured. Then there should be partnership with the state, the civil society and the citizen, so that people-centric, climate-centric, peace incentive development is taken care of. If that is not, perhaps the question comes in, the famous one, Australian tribes, when he talks about that when the last tree on this earth would be cut, when the last fish will be caught, and the last river will be poisoned, then human being will realize that we can't survive on this earth only eating money. It's pathetic. Unless human being takes the care to save to save the each and every tree, to save the each and every fish, and save the water, the river and the other resources and the forest. Perhaps we are standing at the verge of elimination from this earth. Only one solution, perhaps that comes from the solution of Mahatma Gandhi, his dictum, that is, the Mother Earth is having everything to give you. The Mother Earth is having everything to give you, that is, but it is having, the Mother Earth can satisfy each and every need of yours, but not your greed. So use, what's the message out of this sustainable development is that use in terms of your need, but not in terms of the greed. As long you are guided by your need, only your basic minimum need, the world will be sustaining and sustainable for the years and centuries to come. Thank you very much for being with us for this lecture series. We'll be back again with another. Thank you.